Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. Today we're talking about the magical secrets and occult stuff and that within Alice in Wonderland. Now I've got a little bit of a confession to make, Chris, and that is that I have watched Alice in Wonderland when I was a kid, but I haven't watched it since. So I don't really remember much about the story. I know there's something about a Mad Hatter. I know there's something about a talking rabbit and a load of other stuff. So can you quickly sum up the story super quickly for me?
Yeah,
Not
sure.
putting them on the spot or anything.
It's fine. I'm used to it. So, anyway, Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland are both stories by Lewis Carroll. And Disney decided to kind of mix them up a little bit and do a Disney version, as they do, which is almost entirely Adventures of Alice. But then there's a few bits that are in it that aren't in Adventures of Alice, and actually from the Through the Looking Glass story. But the gist is, she's sat having lessons done with her mother, or I guess it might be what do you call them? A nanny of some description. And then I'm assuming she falls asleep, and she goes through this dream world. So in that, obviously, she chases a white rabbit down a hole, and then goes through different parts of the world. So she ends up in a room, and then she gets shrunken and then dropped down. We definitely do a bit about magic potions, I think, in there, where she makes a potion. It has a potion that shrinks her, and then anything she eats seems to make her massive. Which we know a few people like that, I think. Definitely of the pagan variety. And then she kind of goes through a series of kind of mad adventures while things are going on. So she gets a story from Tweedledee and Tweedledum about the stupidity of oysters, or better known as the walrus and the carpenter. And then she goes and has a tea party with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. And then she meets Cheshire Cat.
I remember the Mad Hatter and the Cheshire Cat, though, and the Queen of Hearts. Those three are the characters that I stick in my mind. Alice don't much stick in my mind, but those three characters do.
So, there's talking flowers and singing flowers. That bit's actually from Through the Looking Glass. That's not actually in the Adventures of Alice. Okay. But we could definitely do something about animism and plants there, I guess.
Yeah, animism.
We'll like a bit of animism. And then obviously, there's the last bit where she goes and helps some playing cards paint some roses red because they planted the wrong ones. And then the Queen gets involved. Yeah. They play croquet, and then she gets a stupid trial, and then she wakes up. There you go. Summary done.
So if we start within the story concept, you've got the kind of deeper down the rabbit hole, which is what people talk about very often when they talk about magical practice and the occult. How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? It's like the whole, even they say it in the Matrix, don't it? Take the blue pill or take the red pill. You either stay where you are or you progress more. But if you progress further, it's going to get stranger, and you're going to have to throw, you're going to be going and breaking down your paradigm. So one thing that springs to mind is the mad ramblings of crazy occultists, because you've got the people
the Mad Hatter.
Well, kind of to a certain extent, because I mean, it's difficult to distinguish, I think, for a lot of people that are starting on this path, who is crazy and who is just
who actually has knowledge,
who's profoundly knowledgeable, right? Because if you listen to the New Agers that channels aliens from the Pleiades, you might be thinking, well, that's a little bit crazy and cuckoo and stuff like that. But at the same time, when you're listening to people talking about conjuring up spirits and stuff, you might also think that's kind of crazy. And then you've also got just general spell casting. So it's often a case of finding out how deep down that rabbit hole they are. What does their paradigm look like? Because to all of your witches and stuff like that, obviously, they'll be deeper down that rabbit hole, which is almost like a maze, I think, to a certain extent, because a lot of people will go and they'll find more like a dead end and they get stuck there. And then I see it certainly when they talk about the crooked path within witchcraft. You get so far and you reach a dead end, and then you have to
You mean
reverse.
those PKTWs?
Yeah, you have to reverse back, and then you go down a different avenue, and then you get a little bit further. So there's one of those sorts of things. So how do you assess someone's paradigm and how far down that rabbit hole they are? And when you've got people that talk to you, is there anyone that you feel is further down that rabbit hole than you are? And if they are, how do you know that they are and they're not just crazy?
I suppose I just compare them to the ramblings that you come out with, I guess.
Okay. Am I the crazy one in this, or am I the enlightened one in this?
I think you're the Mad Hatter.
Okay.
The only problem is I don't think you'd know how to make a hat if you tried.
No,
unless it's made out of those crowns things, you know, you get out of the crackers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably what you'd do. You'll be the one rocking up the corner.
I've worn it to the dump supper. I've got a hatter's hat, a proper one as well, proper old school. Came from an antique shop and everything.
The only problem is you don't like hot drinks, really, do you? So, unless it's hot chocolate, and I don't think they'd give you half a cup of hot chocolate.
But to be fair, wouldn't the Mad Hatter be the sort which does take like hot chocolate with all of the whipped cream and all sorts of weird sparklers and shit in it? Or would it be
tea?
Yeah, but is that tea really that crazy? Or maybe it's that special tea that we're not allowed to
sell? It's probably got peyote in it, to be honest. It's probably that. It's probably got some peyote in it. It's one of those that makes me think of that scene from Will and Grace where she goes, "Do you take peyote or lemon in your tea?" And that, sorry, rabbit hole. I can't remember what your question was, but sorry.
How do you assess someone how far down the rabbit hole crazy? Because they'll think you're crazy, won't they? In general.
Well, most people think we're crazy anyway, because we're super witches, and we talk about things like, putting people in hell dimensions all the time. So I suppose, are we the March Hare and the Mad Hatter, and which one's which?
I don't know. We're kind of the Cheshire Cat and the. I think the difference with the archetypes there, the Cheshire Cat appears and disappears when needed.
Yeah, I guess so.
It is one of those things actually, because you'll find this a lot. I think with adepts and mentors, particularly.
Yeah,
they appear and disappear, and you always have to ask with the Cheshire Cat. The Cheshire Cat looks like, or it behaves like, that he is subject to the rules of the land and has something to be scared of and stuff. But actually, if the queen,
he's just a troublemaker.
Yeah, is he actually? I mean, is it just all a lie? Because I mean, there's a thing where doesn't Alice get arrested in that at some point, and you kind of think,
because of the Cheshire Cat.
Yeah, the Cheshire Cat. So the Cheshire Cat is like that mercurial kind of.
Cheshire Cat's like, let's go cause some trouble. Let's kick up a fuss. Let's see what we can do. Let's go and see the Red Queen and make her look stupid, and then get Alice in trouble. But so I suppose technically we are the Cheshire Cat, I guess.
But does the Cheshire Cat do that because the Cheshire Cat knows that down the line it's all got to turn into some mysterious journey that they will learn something from? Or does the Cheshire Cat genuinely just not care and just mess things about? Because you can say that a lot about mentors, can't you? You could say, well, does my mentor that's making me do this actually know that this is going to result in some sort of paradigm shattering, amazing knowledge? Or are they just making it up as they go along and just having a laugh? Because it looks like that, doesn't it, from the outside, if you're on the journey?
It does. But then, to be fair, I think most people would think that if they watched us with some of our mentees, to be honest, because it's a pathway that's actually supposed to benefit just them, and it doesn't technically benefit us. I think that's where the difference is. I suppose if you were going to talk about, the likes of Gardner, and Wicca, then you'd be starting to talk about this kind of process of gatekeeping designed to keep the difference between the classes, first, second, third degree. And actually, until you're in the circle, you're not allowed to know the next level. Whereas I suppose for us, because we don't have any kind of tradition in mind or want any kind of tradition left behind after we go, I suppose that's the big difference for us, isn't it? Is that we're not trying to create a tradition, and we kind of don't care what tradition you come from. It's more a case of, what do you want to achieve, and we'll help you achieve it. In which case, it probably does look like we're just leading people down crazy paths and rabbit holes, trying to just having a laugh. But I suppose there is some truth to that. Have I just rambled, or was there actually some sense in there?
I think what I get from that is a couple of questions. The first question is, how far down the rabbit hole do you think Gerald Gardner got? So answer that one first.
I suppose Gardner is probably slightly more like the walrus in the carpenter. So, he's just gobbling down these I went to call them orchids then, oysters, and tricking them all into giving him his power. I'm pretty sure that's what he was trying to do. But then maybe I'm just being judgmental of Gardner. I don't think he was clever enough to actually absorb other people's knowledge and power, but he tried.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think Gardner got down that rabbit hole particularly far. I'm not sure he came out the other side in some sort of mysterious wonderland, if I'm perfectly honest.
No.
But that's just going on as a magical practice, and not the public magical practice, the secret magical practice that we're not supposed to know about but do. So in terms of then rabbit holes, you could think of a religion as a rabbit hole, or you could think of a magical system as a rabbit hole. And the founders or the creators of that magical tradition are kind of like the rabbit that you're following down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So, but obviously at some point they disappear. So what is that? Is that these are just doorways? So once you reach the pinnacle of the tradition of Wicca that Gerald Gardner created, like Gardnerian Wicca or something, does that just mean that once you've got to that black belt level Wicca that you've only just started, you've only just got into, come out the other end of the rabbit hole, and you're now in the mystical wonderland, and then you have to get a proper mentor like the Cheshire Cat? Because
I think that's pretty much what has to happen.
From other traditions and stuff, don't they?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And they feel like they've got as far as they can with the tradition that they're with, and want something different, but not necessarily a different tradition. They just want to get to a next level, don't they? Which I suppose with Alice is just kind of yet another different party of some description, or get herself into some kind of new trouble.
She's an adventurer. And that's what learning magic is kind of about, isn't it? It's adventure. So the structure of actually getting to the place with the tools for you to start an adventure is really the magical system that you're learning, or the tradition that you're in. Is when you've mastered and you've got those tools in your little fool's knapsack, for you tarot fans, that you can actually start on your journey. And a lot of people think that they're already in that state when they're starting their magical journey and going through all these initiatory degrees. But actually, you're only just setting foot towards the rabbit hole.
The real stuff only gets there when you've got to that third degree, surely, because at that point you've then completed whatever part of that magical tradition is supposed to teach you. Yeah. At that point, then it should be you going out there to discover the next adventure and the next adventure after that, even within your paradigm of Wicca, if necessary. But it should be pushing the next boundary and the next boundary. The question is whether or not these offshoots from Gardner, are they new adventures, or are they actually just a new lens on the original stories? Are they just an adaptation as opposed to a new story? And how much, because we're not part of those initiated traditions, is it a case of, well, actually, all the way up to the third degree is the same as Gardner set out to a certain extent, and that actually the difference is probably what they'll do with it after that. I don't know. Um, Maybe some of these Wiccans can tell us and educate us about what
Well,
actually
they
goes
can't
on.
because
But
they're
then,
all confined and oath-bound, aren't they? I mean, it doesn't mean that they don't break their oaths, but they're not supposed to. I mean, I've always come to that conclusion or those conclusions or thought about that based on client work, so client stuff. So when you've got an initiate of a specific Wiccan tradition who's a high priest or high priestess that has been that for 20 odd years, 30 odd years, that were around in the 1950s and 60s, that are still coming to you with problems, even though they've
yeah,
got that for a degree, and even though they are, you know, the high priestess of a specific coven, possibly even one of the founders of the tradition in the first place, possibly.
mm,
Then, judging by the things that they struggle with and get stuck on, that tells you an awful lot about whether the magical tradition's evolved, doesn't it? Because if the people at the top are struggling with things, if they're struggling just getting through the rabbit hole, then it might give you some indication of the rest of them that are the kind of underlings or the second or first degrees that are kind of they're supposed to be
yeah.
trained.
And I suppose you've got the added level there of the fact that the added complication, shall we say, of the religious aspect of it, and that actually, you know, the reverence part of any tradition takes up a lot of the time of that year. So every year, because they've got certain observances to complete
Hmm.
that don't actually necessarily push their magical practice, you know, you have those kind of, well, once you take that part out of your year of making sure you've done all your aspects and you've done all your Sabbaths and all that kind of stuff, you're left with less and less time, I guess, to actually push your practice into new levels. I suppose for us, it's a case of we just design new ways to celebrate those. But if they have a set reason, you know, a set group of rituals that they have to do each year, because that's part of the practice, then I suppose that then takes away from the time within the year for you to be pushing.
Hmm.
At which point it's going to take longer for a tradition like that to progress to the next level. Whereas, you know, our limited experiences of some of the other offshoots, like the Cochranes, and some of the kind of traditions they've got over here, you know, traditional coven witches over here, where they use it slightly more as a loose framework of there is the story that is mapped throughout the year, but actually they find new ways to experience each of those. And I've got friends that observe kind of Obod and their kind of year, and theirs is so ritualistic, like down to the wording, to the point that, you know, the one that they host each year is the one that gets to be a bit more experimental because they're not actually Obod, but they're in with the Obods. So because they host that particular one, they get to play with the order of the play, shall we say, and makes that actually come out to be a little bit different. Whereas, you know, maybe that is the restriction. Maybe that's the part that makes it more restrictive. Then equally, we're not third degree Wiccans, so you know, maybe we just don't know what goes on behind closed doors with all the clothes off.
Well, so to sum that up, because there's a lot to unpack there, you're talking about witches that frame their magical workings within a framework of festivals throughout the year. So whether it's
Yeah,
solar festivals, those neo-pagan ones that they make up, you know, in the
yeah,
1950s, or whether it's lunar cycles and lunar phases. But obviously, that's not all magical practitioners. If you think of
mm,
the people that we've met, and you think of some of the traditional witches, let's ignore the Wiccans because they get too much fucking limelight, let's be fair. We don't need to talk
yeah,
about witches any more than everyone already bloody does. Let's talk about some of the traditional witches, right? You think about the way they frame their rituals and their magical workings, but then you also look at the point of their magical practice. And certainly some of the ones that we've met, which you can probably know who I'm talking about, um, a lot of that's about the journey and the fun of the
Yeah,
journey. Whereas when you change that and look at other types of magical practitioners like the magicians, ceremonial magicians particularly, a lot of that's about the destination, isn't it? So
yeah,
all of their work is about getting to a destination, whereas you look at some of these traditional witches, and a lot of that's more about the journey and the having fun on the way to who knows where.
yeah. Meeting new spirits and
Yeah.
exploring new parts of deity, and then riding the hedge and
Mm,
just exploring, like proper Alice stuff of just kind of like, well, let's just I'm done with this now. Let's go find the rabbit somewhere else.
mm.
Move on to the next scene and the next scene. But yeah,
But what about the pros and cons of those approaches? Because rarely do you ever see a practitioner, and I can't think off the top of my head a recent one we've had, who merge both of those together. So they've got a set kind of rough idea of where they want to go and they're aiming for that, but they're perfectly happy. It reminds me a lot of Star Trek Voyager. They're trying to get home, but they never end up getting home very quickly because they're always darting off in a completely different direction, but they're
yeah,
kind of always heading for home, aren't they? So
yeah,
why
yeah,
isn't there a lot of Star Trek Voyager type witches and magicians and such? They're either the let's mess about and see what happens kind of fooling around adventure seekers, or they're the strict, rigid, I need to get attain this, I need to get there, in X amount of time before I die, whatever. But there's not a lot of blending of the two. Why do you think that is?
I think it comes down, it's a lot of it's down to personality.
Mm,
I think that's a large part of it. Also, you've got the problems that come with the fact of whether or not you're in a coven or not. That sort of that's then led by whoever's actually running the coven, I guess. Most covens are then limited only by the person that's in charge. So, which is very, very different because then in that situation, you've got somebody leading the charge. Are you all leaning towards their destination, or is the point of the coven, or let's cause as many adventures as possible, depending on the mix of people. So again, it kind of still applies the personality rule because it's how well that group gel as a unit will depend on what the personality of the coven is, I guess, and allows you to kind of push which one of those routes you're probably going to go down. I'm trying to think if there is anybody I know that actually does that.
but there are a lot of
I
solitaries,
suppose,
I remember. A lot of the people that we meet on their magical journeys are solitaries. And the problem with that is that or the good thing about solitaries is that when you train someone and they make a big breakthrough, that's brilliant. The problem is
yeah,
when you get someone who's a part of a group and you help them make a big breakthrough, they struggle with the other members of the group that hasn't made that breakthrough. And that
yeah,
I've always found that to be a big problem because it's almost like a lot of these groups and things, they may vary in abilities and stuff, and some may be specialists and on very specific kind of paths, but all seem to meet together in a loose kind of fitting form. But sometimes it can be a real problem when the herd doesn't move together on certain
yeah.
things, and that's where a lot of times some of these covens collapse, and that's one of those things which some of
But it's
the
coven politics, isn't it? At the end of the
yeah.
day, it's also the same way. It's the same way as when you get all these groups online, where you've got thousands of people in these groups, and they don't all agree because there's nothing. They try to group themselves as a group in loosely by calling themselves hedge witches or or pagans or neo pagans or whatever. They find a group that they think the umbrella covers them. Um,
Mm,
and then they find out, well, actually, there is no creed to it. It's not like a Christian, where if they're put from one particular group, they have a text that leads them all, or so I think the problem is always the fact that it's so individualistic,
Yeah.
but then they use these titles to try and group themselves together. And that's where the politics always happen, because their experiences and what they do and how they practice are all so different, that you get these kind of arguments within groups, and you just kind of like, well, does it really matter? Like, if somebody else is practicing differently to you, does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, like, surely it's the journey and the destination that matter. And you're the only one going down that, unless you're in a coven, obviously, in which case you're collectively going down that rabbit hole, or trying to get to a particular party.
Okay. So the next question I've got for you, because we talk about Wiccans a lot, don't we? But we don't talk about the other types of witches. So we're friends with some Cochranites, aren't we? Now, would you
We
say
are.
they're like Mad Hatters? Because the Mad Hatters Tea Party is the one where they love to just tell riddles over and over and over again till the end of time. And the teaching method of said Cochranites is to tell
Yeah.
riddles.
Why is a raven like a writing desk?
I'm wondering whether some of our friends could answer the question of why is a raven like a writing desk? And also there's the kind of idea of eternally standing still at 6 p.m., which happens to be tea time. So in terms of the teaching methods of riddles and stuff like that, which we know a couple of people or several people now actually, because they're probably not actually the only ones, now I come to think of it, that like to use a lot of riddles when teaching and keeping their kind of metaphysical minds sharp, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose they like the games, don't they? Which some people would probably consider to be gatekeeping, but it's not. It's a case
Well,
of
I
if
don't
it
know.
isn't, it isn't.
Because
It
everyone
isn't, it
says that
isn't.
gatekeeping is when you don't tell me the answer, when you make it whereby it's not like in the textbook at school where it says all the answers in the back of the book, when you're actually having to work to do something for yourself. Apparently, that's gatekeeping now, from what I'm told. If I don't
Yeah,
give the
but
person
that's
the answer instead of making them work for it, apparently that's gatekeeping now.
Yeah, but that's rubbish insta witch crap. So, like, let's not really base ourselves on that. True gatekeeping is when you have a series of goals that you want someone to get through, and you want them to be able to find that gate on their own. And that is different to the case of gatekeeping is you're not ready for that. The whole point of it is as soon as you can ask the question in the right way, in order to have earned that knowledge. And earn that knowledge, I mean by actually being able to understand it. Because this is why we get people get accused of gatekeeping all the time. It's because they want it to be like Wikipedia. And no, that wasn't a pun about Wiccans, but they want it to be a Google Drive. They want to just put it in the search engine and kind of go, oh, I just want to pull this answer out. Now, just because you've bought a few skull-shaped things does not mean you automatically then understand necromancy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is that kind of, you have to have done the work in order to get yourself to an understanding level of that. Either you choose to do it that method, or you go and get yourself a mentor that's going to get you to that point. But those are your choices. You either find your way there, or you get somebody that's willing to help you get there. And and all gatekeeping is designed to make sure that you are safe when you get to the point. Because at the end of the day, it's about there is no guidebook to any of the beyond the beginner stuff. So beyond that point, you are taking a risk. Like this, it's not. There is no way of practicing witchcraft in a true sense and having your safety belt on. Like there is no way of practicing like that unless you're going to spend lots of money and time and energy working into making sure that you've got your seatbelt on, and you've got some airbags and all that kind of crap. Like, you know,
I'm going to have to cut you
otherwise,
off there because we've now run out of time for the standard edition of this podcast. So goodbye.